we start by acknowledging country. So we begin today by acknowledging the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, traditional custodians of the land, waters and skies in the place we learn and work here on UTS Central Campus. We pay respect to the elders, past and present, acknowledging them as the traditional custodians of knowledge for this land. And we extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today, and to any members of international Indigenous communities in attendance. There is diversity in forms of knowledge, and not all knowledge is or can be represented in open educational resources and practices. During this Open Education Week, we have explored the role of open education in decolonizing our curriculums and promoting social justice. And we commit to continuously critiquing our own approaches through a decolonized lens. And to inform this acknowledgement, I used the book chapter Indigenization, Decolonization, and Cultural Inclusion in the book Enhancing Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility in OER by Nikki Anderson. And that has been linked in the chat for you, and that is CC licensed. And I'm going to hand over to Sebastian to open our session.
Thank you, Jenny, and good morning, everyone. And that's a really nice acknowledgement and really resonated with me, Jenny. So thank you for that. And let me also join you in acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. From where I'm sitting here in present-day Sydney, it's a beautiful day, and it's another reminder, I think, to look back to history and place, and the responsibility really we have all as workers in educational institutions to advocate for historical consciousness. The Australian landmass was colonized in the modern sense of the word quite recently, and the scars from the displacement of a whole people are still felt today. And I'm reminded of the beauty of this place every day, and consider myself very fortunate as someone who came here as an adult to be able to connect and while also reflecting on the past and ongoing traumas of the place. So thank you. And thank you for the introduction, Jenny. I also have to say, this week has gone by very quickly. It's been lined with some really productive and meaningful exchanges to put open education front and center. For me, as head of learning design here at UTS, I've always been conscious that when we work with faculty to design learning experiences, we embrace open educational resources and practices. Indeed, you'll see behind me here the UTS learning design quality framework that we've developed to codify our learning design principles. And you'll see they look like sort of tiles there. There's 42 standards. And one of those standards talks about the need to make use of OER whenever possible. And we included that as a standard, not because it's a university requirement or anything like that, but because it really signals an important aspiration, and it pushes learning designers, I think, to consciously look for open ways of working and designing. And we did have a little open call for learning designers last week to share the ways how they are embedding OER and OEP into their designs. And I was blown away by how much this is happening, and just the collaborative spirit in wanting to share those designs across the team. So it's good to see it's happening, but I'm also recognizing that we need to actively advocate for its use. So as we draw OE Week 2025 to a close, what's a more appropriate way to do that than to bring focus back to learning design? I know we have some fabulous experts with us from Canada today to do some lightning talks with us. So I just want to say thank you in advance for joining us, and really hope to see this important work result in more open educational practices in learning design. Thank you so much. And yeah, Jenny, back to you.
Thank you, Sebastian. Okay, and today we are exploring what meaningful open educational resources and practices might look like when implemented in learning design and education. And a note to say that here at University of Technology, Sydney, we use the term learning design. But I'm sure you're aware across the world, other terms are used. So today we might also use instructional design and educational design. They usually have similar or identical meaning. And I'd like to introduce our 4 guests. We've challenged each of them to a lightning talk. So that's a 5-minute presentation on our topic. Is 5 minutes enough to hear from each of them? Of course not. We will do our best. And then when we've heard from each of them, we'll have a discussion to explore their ideas more deeply and identify some takeaway themes and strategies. First, we're going to hear from Dr. Tannis Morgan. Tannis is Associate Vice President, Academic Innovation at Vancouver Community College in Vancouver, Canada. Next, Dr. Verena Roberts will speak. Verena is an instructional designer with Thompson Rivers University Open Learning and an adjunct assistant professor with the University of Calgary. Then Dr. Danielle Dubien will present. Danielle is a Canadian instructional designer with MacEwan University, whose experience includes designing for secondary schools and creating corporate training materials. And finally, our colleague, Dr. Mais Fatayer, will take the lightning talk challenge. Mais is the Learner Experience Design Manager here at the University of Technology, Sydney. And in the chat, you will find some examples of their work related to learning design, if you are interested in finding out more. So you've heard from me. I am going to hand you over to Tannis to begin.
Great. Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, Sebastian, for that acknowledgement. I'm just going to flip up my slides, and I'll try not to stress about the time because I had quite a few slides, and in the background, I was deleting them rapidly here. And I just also want to, that's not going to the right place. Hang on. Do you see that?
Yes.
You do. Perfect. Okay. I should also mention that before this current job, I spent many years as a learning designer, instructional designer, as we call it here. It is still the best job I ever had. So I do come to this with a very keen interest, an ongoing keen interest in instructional design, and it still informs a lot of the work that I do. I would like to just start by acknowledging that Vancouver Community College, where I work, is located on the unceded and unsurrendered territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, who have been and continue to be stewards of these lands since time immemorial. And that comes with considerable commitment from our own institution to decolonization. This got referenced in the chat. Some of what I'm talking about came out of this piece of work that I did, a piece of research for BC Campus when I was at BC Campus, and it was also generously sponsored by BC Campus. So I want to give a big shout out there. And I'm just going to launch into it because there's only 5 minutes. So when answering this question of the 3 questions that were put in front of us, I have 3 responses. And when I think about what does meaningful OER, OEP look like, I go back down to the roots and say, open education practices really require open edtech infrastructure. And I feel quite strongly of that. I know I have some colleagues in the chat who, such as Alan Levine, who understand where I'm coming with that, in part because he was also involved in what is presented here, which is the Open EdTech Collaborative, which in our province, we have a province of 25 post-secondary institutions, public post-secondaries, and we set up a collaborative co-op sort of model to share a WordPress infrastructure and Mattermost infrastructure. And the idea behind that was that we couldn't individually in our institutions find ways to find the resources in IT and the people in IT to actually do that alone individually across 25 institutions. So we came together as a sector and established this collaborative, which has been operating for, I think, almost 10 years now. And the idea here is that it's a contributions, not a contracts model. Now, over the course of the 8 years, this is the report, the annual report that we produced last year. So it's even now a little bit out of date, but you'll see on the right-hand side here, the WordPress part of this has really had an impact. These are all public post-secondary institutions. Any student or faculty member who has a institutional email has access to both Mattermost and WordPress. So it's had a significant impact to demonstrate the open education practice part of it. Similarly, and I know, Verena, you're at TRU, so I don't want to say anything that you might be presenting actually, but TRU, if you have any time to spend some time on the institutional version of this, and of course, Brian Lamb, who is responsible for the TrueBox, is also one of the co-founders of the OpenETC, just connecting some dots there. But there's a whole section there where you can explore very clearly how open education practices are enabled by the WordPress infrastructure that is being provided at TRU. I've just pointed to 2 of them here. And I guess what I want to say about this too is these 2 examples, as they were explained to me, have really gone beyond just being a student project, and now they are community embedded projects. They are community embedded resources. The other piece that's significant about this Food Loops one is that the WordPress template that the mapping part that was enabled by the Google API, then became a shareable, clonable template for the whole sector. So it was created once and shared abroad. So now that any institution that has a mapping type need doesn't have to invest the resources to create this template. It's clonable and reusable. So that's the open ed infrastructure part. The second piece that came out of the research that I did for BC Campus was really around professional development that sticks. I mean, the awareness part of open education is such a big part of learning designer work and creating faculty champions and all that good effort. But I had some questions, and the research was sort of suggesting that maybe that doesn't always stick. So maybe we need a different kind of pedagogy to get to professional development that sticks, which is where this idea of an open education challenge series came about. Again, it was built on the OpenETC site, actually. It's ran a few times through BC Campus, but the idea of this being clonable OER and open ed practices results in, for example, just this year, Okanagan College, another college in our sector, has just taken that and they're going to run it as well. And it also spawned the UDL Explorer, which is a similar effort to create awareness about UDL in the sector. And these are all bite-sized email, alert type things that would go into you'd sign up for it, go in your inbox. Why don't you do 1 or 2 challenges a week that's designed to be 5 minutes or less, but you're taking this bite-sized approach to faculty development. And finally, I've been really thinking a lot about some of the work I did at the previous college I was at. And it was this idea of open first for impact. So not just open first because open is a good thing to do, or a Creative Commons license allows others to pick it up and do whatever they want. It was really about, if you do open, what kind of impact that can actually have. And in this case, this is from a few years ago, but when the fentanyl crisis, which actually originated on the West Coast of North America, was starting to happen, the first responder community needed training about, okay, what if they need to know about fentanyl safety, how to be safe around handling it. And so we were asked to create, a course. And we said, well, no, this isn't a course. This is like an open resource, because putting it behind an LMS just makes no sense in this particular case. And as a result of putting a Creative Commons license on this and making it very open, as the crisis spread across North America all the way to the East Coast, the institution was getting calls all over the place. Can we reuse this? We need this for our people. Fentanyl's hit our first responders. And it ended up being written up in The Atlantic, which is, a fairly significant publication. And I think it's a good example of, open first for impact actually can have really important lasting effects. Note the caveat here, though, that not everything can or should be open. And I think that was addressed in the earlier comments, the opening comments as well. So all that to say, I think in summary, it's really just that there's a lot of good intentions that come from instructional designers and learning designers, but there's not always this operational agency. What the research showed was that you need top-down, bottom-up approaches. You need directors of teaching and learning centers really supporting the open first idea. You need senior leadership to really understand what open is. So where I saw a lot of the tensions was really in this operational agency piece of it, because the intentional agency certainly was there. So my final slide is this, in terms of, do the institutional structure support open first for learning designers? And is this, an open first teaching and learning center? That's where the majority of my work has been. That's why it's there. Right now in my own institution, we're looking at open first curriculum development, like just getting that into policy, procedures, getting a mindset around that. And of course, the open first educational technology continues to be both a challenge and a barrier. So I'll stop there. I hope I didn't go over time.
Thank you so much, Tannis. What an amazing kickoff to our lightning talks. I'm going to hand straight over to Verena. Verena, you're on mute.
So I was asking, can you see my slides? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, there we go. Except we're going to go there. Okay. Sorry, multiple screens. Just quickly, I want to acknowledge that I am located on Treaty 6 territory, and I respect the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all the First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continue to enrich our vibrant community. Coming from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, but as Tannis said, I have the privilege of working with Thompson Rivers University, which is located in Kamloops, British Columbia, and I am an instructional designer who works from home, which is exciting in a different province. And today I took a different approach, which is great, actually. So I love what Tannis did. So come to you, I put in our presentation. So Leo Havman, Helen Dewart, and myself about rethinking open learning design and some of the principles when we took a more theoretical approach. Principles of open learning design are dependent upon the opportunities for learners to co-design, as we see a lot with our possible opportunities for AI integration. I see a lot of the scaffolding from open educational practices happening with when we think about what's going on with AI opportunities or generative AI in particular. Learners collaboratively and individually share their learning experiences through open and closed feedback loops. So the importance of how do we integrate those feedback loops into our courses, and that includes multiple people, spaces, and perspectives. How are we transparently demonstrating our learning, and how learning occurs through stages and continuums and isn't expected to be all in one course. It's not expected to be all in one moment. And how do we come into these courses and then create more sustainable opportunities? And I saw some of that demonstrated by Tannis just now. And how do we integrate textbooks and resources and use them in multiple ways, in different ways beyond courses, not just students coming in and out of courses. And open learning emphasizes the learning process over a product itself. This came from my dissertation research in particular, and we see that through reflective practices, open educational practice comes through building relationships, co-designing learning pathways, building and sharing knowledge to get to building those personal learning networks. And answering those infrastructure questions we were asked, when we're thinking about open infrastructure, is the learning experience designed for sharing from the beginning? So are we using open source tools? Are we thinking about personal data security and safety and giving those options to our students? Digital learning spaces, learning management systems, blogging, vlogging, whatever, video conferencing tools, participatory learning. How are collaborations, interactions, and networks developed from the beginning using those open tools rather than just jumping to commercial tools from the beginning? Designing for openness encourages negotiation of practices in the higher education learning spaces. Negotiation means listening, hearing different perspectives, encouraging those perspectives in our learning spaces, according to Cronin, and emphasizing the importance of peer review and critical approaches to knowledge, and advocating for the opening at the margins. And that was really what we were getting at and why we were invited today, because as learning designers or instructional designers, we're often those who are in the middle of spaces. So we will have faculty maybe in one group, and then we'll have administration or programmer, others on the other side, or IT, and we're the ones who are the translators or the ones who help and support those negotiations. And so we have to have a very broad understanding of the potential of openness and what it might bring. And so Helen actually created this image. And when we look at this, we want to dial up that intentional learning design. So when we think of on the left side, this is more closed activities or behavior. And then on the right-hand side, we see more open. It doesn't mean that anyone is right or wrong on this. So I want to encourage dialing it up in doing what works best within your context or your group or collaboration or your own individual project. Some of the things that might influence going from a closed to open environment are like the design, privacy, safety, security, efficacy. You can see those at the bottom, those factors. But we want to encourage you to move from those static to dynamic opportunities, from the facilitated to exploratory, and you'll see the different words here. But like Tannis, I'm going to keep moving. The key concepts from our chapter, which include the sharing, contributing to open learning design, is to open up that design process by explaining how to design for human-centered learning within learning ecosystem, which is shaped by personal and professional learning experiences, bringing those personal experiences to the table and not just starting from scratch. In open, we never start from scratch. We go and we look to the shoulders of those that we're jumping from, I'd say. We're jumping and learning from. Promoting digital fluency and awareness, encouraging and supporting relationship building and collaboration, assessment strategies and learning pathways with an emphasis on process, like we talked before, and co-designing that learning process with our learners, or alternatively, that's ultimately what we're doing when we're teaching, but collaborating and doing it within the design process itself, and focus on learning as a process over a product. Like Tannis said, there is no template for open. I'm glad I'm seeing some common themes. There's no guide to follow when integrating the design of learning to flow between the learning management systems and Twitter chats, for example. Well, no longer, wouldn't promote Twitter chats, as they say. Open learning designers' role is to develop awareness around the potential for open educational practices and balancing the need for student-centered design that ensures student choice, safety, and privacy. Again, considers digital fluency and institutional demands. So you can't just go one way. We are the center of remembering all those perspectives, all those opportunities, advocating and building awareness of issues in equity, diversity, accessibility, and inclusion, and student-centered instructor-led course designs that connect and reflect, build awareness, dial it up slowly, negotiate, and critical decisions based on student success. And the last slide is an intent. We would hope that you think of open learning design as an intentional, reflective, and open learning design can provide the impetus to rethink and redesign teaching and learning environments and curricula. And that is where I'm going to stop, but there are more, but not today. There we go.
Thank you, Verena, and thank you for being so generous with your slides and posting them in the chat there. Straight over to Danielle.
All right, thank you. I've decided not to present slides. I acknowledge that I'm on the traditional lands referred to as Treaty 4 territory. They are the original lands of the Cree, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. I work and live in Saskatchewan, but I also teach at MacEwan University in Edmonton. So I'm going to talk to you about is my experiences and research in open education involving open educational resources and practices and open source technology. But I'm going to go at it through the lens of trauma-informed pedagogy, and I'm going to use 5 values. So I'm going to talk about culture as well as instructional design. So the 5 values are based off of the research of Fallett and Harris of 2009. And their 5 values are safety, or what I call bravery rather, and trustworthiness, choice, collaboration, and empowerment. So first, for safety, I recommend building nurturing an environment where people are more likely to feel comfortable being challenged, particularly in an open environment that the world may have access to, possibly indefinitely. I would invite students to introduce themselves and provide them with prompts related to the course topic, rather than having them reveal personal information or identifying information or information about their children. People like to share photos about their children in classes, even if it's open. Not everyone has confidentiality or discretion on their mind, but as an instructor, I feel it's my ethical duty to provide guidance about these things. Trustworthiness. To build trust in a classroom, I recommend allowing students the opportunity to feel out the course for a few weeks before publishing anything openly. Once they have evidence of being treated well by the instructor, once they see how positive interactions are nurtured, once they see how various features of a course are supposed to be used for their learning benefit, then they're in a better position to trust each other and you, and then to post things openly. Now, you can still have them post all kinds of things anonymously out in the open, and you can have information-rich reflections posted privately, either to the classroom or only to the teacher. In open environments, the literature has shown that students can feel anxious about interacting with each other, mainly out of fear of inadvertently insulting someone else, but also about being poorly perceived. So what to do? Well, explain who the intended audiences are, if any, and why they matter to the learning context. Explain who has access to their assignments. Provide guidance on how and how not to interact. And this may seem like bizarre advice, may seem a bit strange, but I've seen all kinds of blatantly racist and sexist comments from students at all levels, including postdoctoral students, and add to that microaggressions of all flavors. A different point about trustworthiness, if you're introducing an open source tool or an open approach, it's important to explain what the value is for the students' learning and how to use it. As an instructional designer, I recommend a just-in-time approach. That is, explain how the method or tool is used just ahead of when the students will use it. Regarding choice. When designing an open course, one thing that can help is to lay out your entire course on a digital or real whiteboard using sticky notes to represent each resource, activity, assessment. For each one, determine what the benefits are of using open platforms, open source communication and learning tools, and OERs. Also, open education is about social justice, isn't it? So with all of these elements, determine whether social justice needs are being met. Still, regarding choice, I recommend structuring the course so that students have a choice as to whether to publish their work openly or not. Again, from the literature, students can have anxiety about publishing openly, particularly when it comes to sharing early drafts of their work. Discuss the benefits and disadvantages of publishing openly. And provide them with options of resources or methods for completing assignments. So give them books or websites or something to choose from when they do their assignments. Choice is an important element. Collaboration. I recommend including group work to the extent that it's meaningful and purposeful. Increasingly, it's challenging for students to meet at the same time because many of them have jobs. In elective courses, such as the one that I teach at MacEwan, you can have students from all undergraduate and some graduate levels, and they can come from all subject areas. That means their schedules are not compatible. And so an alternative is to simply have them work with one other person some of the time. And what we've done in the course is not designed by me, by the way. It was designed by Ty Monroe, and there's a resource, an open educational resource that she wrote in collaboration with a couple of other people, and some of her chapters were written as she supervised students. Yeah, that's it. So she designed the book, and I highly recommend it. It's really well designed. So yeah, within the course, we offer a lot of options for students to complete their work. And one thing that we do when the students are interacting in pairs, what they do is they'll have some questions that they answer together. Then they have to examine, they have to reflect back on it. What was the same? What was different? What were our perspectives? And then they reflect on that, on further that discussion and indicate what they've learned. One more point, empowerment. For empowerment, I recommend providing students with opportunities to successively improve their work. We do that in the course in sustainability. I recommend fostering independence, that is, provide opportunities to develop skills with increasing challenges. Have students reflect on their own progress and acknowledge what they've achieved. Many students from oppressed populations might particularly benefit from this approach. In turn, the aim is to help students to develop their confidence. I also recommend inviting students to reflect on the impact of open education on their learning and development. Again, open education is a social justice measure. Was it successful? It's a question I also invite instructional designers to answer. Most importantly, if you want a project of instructional design in open education to succeed, find kind people to work with. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danielle. And finally, Mais.
Thank you. Good afternoon for everyone in Canada and any international speakers joining today. Good morning and assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. I'm gonna practice something that I learned this week from engaging in this Open Education Week. So I'm gonna describe to you how I look on the screen. I'm a middle-aged woman in the Zoom video. I'm centered in the middle, wearing a mint green hijab with a white top. The background is a light beige, and there's a string of alternating green and blue triangle flags across the top. On the left side of the image, there is a circular badge that reads "Featured in Open Education Week 2025, organized by Open Education Global." In the bottom left corner, we can see my name, Mais Fatayer. In the bottom right corner, there's Creative Commons license and the logo of Open Education Global. I also would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on whose ancestral lands the University of Technology City campus now stands. Also acknowledging the Darug people of Canterbury Bankstown, where I live. I also would like to acknowledge and remind people that the land of Palestine and the people of Palestine are suffering until this moment during the last 26 years due to settler colonization, which is a topic that we've been talking about earlier in this week. Now, here's how I'm going to structure my talk. Similar to Danielle, I don't have slides, but I'm going to talk about 4 things. I'll describe a situation, I'll talk about a bit of complication, I'll put a question for you, and then propose some solutions. Now, the wonderful panel have already talked about many techniques and wonderful insights, which you'll hear me talking also about in my talk, but I would like to take the Australian perspective in this sense. So the situation that I would like to present to you is that, and I would like to share a bit of my experience. I started working in learning design in 2011 in a more formal settings, but I'm not until a few years later, I started to understand more about this emerging profession. At the same time, I started researching open education. I tried to be the open learning designer, sometimes intentionally, and many times when I had the opportunity. So over a decade or so, the profession of learning design has become increasingly more important in the Australian higher education. As learning designers, we work alongside academics, the senior management, to improve the learner or the student's experience. Now, learning designers are central to crafting learning experiences, as we know, and I believe everyone agrees on that. We create resources, enhance academic capabilities in the use of technology, and implementing active learning techniques. Many of us across open education, many of us actually come across open education either accidentally or intentionally. Some adopted open education practices, but from my experience in this domain, I believe we are still not active in integrating open education practices and learning and teaching. Now, here's the complication. While I believe learning designers should play a vital role in integration of open education practices, we encounter many challenges in fully embracing these practices, particularly when faced with constraints in our agency. Tannis did talk about that, and also in her work that 2019 that was inspiring for me, and also Jenny and Keith Heggert, where we extended that work a little bit last year. And Tannis pointed out that there is a lack of time, space, and support from leadership. And also, as she mentioned today, there was a disparity between the intentional and the operational agency of the learning designers. At the same time, libraries and librarians are at the forefront of many open education initiatives, as I've seen here in Australia. However, when curating open education resources, libraries and librarians often bear the primary responsibility in that broader discussion about adopting open educational resources in learning and teaching. So in my view, there is a need to greater support from learning designers to create more opportunities to enhance that collaboration and ultimately advancing the adoption of open education practices here in Australian higher education in learning and teaching communities. Again, from my perspective, the impact of open educational resources on efficient learning design is still, unfortunately, not realized enough at this point. Now, I'm going to put a question to you and for everyone who's listening today. If you can put some thoughts in the chat. And Tannis, Verena, and Danielle also shared so many inspiring ideas. So how do you think learning designers can become more actively involved in the adoption of open education practices? Now, on my part, I'm going to share with you some solutions. Some of them you've heard about them during Open Education Week and from our panelists today, but also would like to iterate a few things and share with you some examples. Now, I would like to argue that learning designers with their expertise, relational power, stakeholder management skills, deep involvement in learning and teaching practices are well positioned to drive conversations and catalyze that change towards open education practice more intentionally. So what potential learning designers have to lead open education initiatives and innovations? I will share with you 5 solutions, but I would like you to tell me in the chat, as learning designers, curriculum developers, or learning and teaching support team, and also if we have academics in the room today, tell us, where do you think we can start to become more intentional in integrating open education and learning design here in Australian institutions? Now, here are some solutions that I would like to share with you, and some of them you've already maybe come across during Open Education Week. The creation and adaptation of content, thinking about the support of academics and utilizing open education to introduce impactful educational intervention. Yesterday, we had on the panel Stephen Chan, who pointed out that we need to focus on what open education resources we need in order to solve a real problem. So not just adapting for the sake of it. Also, Julian Piquet yesterday talked about creating an open educational resource to solve an existing problem in his domain in biochemistry, where the threshold concept challenge proved to be something that is correlated with many failures for students in finishing these courses. The second one is around access. Cutting costs is a major one, where we can point academics to replacing publishers' textbooks with open access textbooks, saving a lot of money. Amanda White yesterday talked about also the impact of on the learning experience, and where the students who failed the subject last year and did it this year actually said that because the book was free, we could do it. Accessibility is another important aspect. Adopting open education means we can apply inclusive practices through flexibility. And if you used open education resources, you know, because of the flexibility of the licenses associated to them, we'll be able to convert a PDF file into an audio version or a H5P activity. Open pedagogy is another important one. We talked about it this week when we pointed out that due to the challenge that everyone is hearing of the generative AI and the need to redesign our assessments, we need to find more authentic ways to design assessments. And we talked about designing or introducing renewable assessments to academics. And I feel learning designers are well positioned to start these conversations. The last one I would like to share with you is the open learning designer. The wonderful speakers also mentioned that in almost every talk, and I would like from my end to share with you some of the work that we have done to become more open learning designers. So how do we become more transparent with our learning design work? So we continue to build that trust with academics about our skills in improving the teaching experience? Can we make our learning design open? Can we become more intentional about using learning design models here in the Australian institutions? As an example that I'm proud of, and I know many of the attendees here are one of the authors of this work, the book Designing Learning for Inclusivity and Diversity. It's in an open textbook that we published last year, which offers a comprehensive guide for designing learning experiences that are accessible, equitable, and inclusive. What we did in this project is opening our learning design practices, where we were able to share with other learning designers our learning design approaches. So these were my last, that was my last part of the talk, and these are the 5 techniques, but I'd like to hear more from the audience on what things that you think you can start with. Thank you.
And I think we'll start the our 15 minutes of discussion with that question that you posed, Mason. I think we've already got some responses in the chat. So the question was, how can learning designers become more actively involved in the adoption of open educational practices? And of course, our 4 lightning presentations have all touched on this. Perhaps getting an idea of like one key thing from each of you would be great. Does anyone want to start responding to that?
I can start if that helps. I can't even find my mouse to put my little hand, but I think, as you highlighted, Mace, being confident enough to advocate for being an open learning designer. I think I know that Helen and Leo and I talked about that a lot, that sometimes you feel like you have to hide your advocacy for openness. But if anyone knows me, I guess they would know that I am an open learning advocate. So why am I? So we call ourselves open learning designers. So I think that's really important, to be proud of it and to think about what that means, and that is thinking about, you know, that negotiation that you talk about between many people within the institution, but also the tools, the practices, the content, and knowing and using it as much as we can. But, you know, being loud and proud as open learning designers.
The main thing I would say is to experiment with open educational tools. I agree with what Tannis said, that you need technological infrastructure to support open education. So I would recommend experimenting with a variety of tools and seeing their benefits and harms. Also, I find it extremely helpful to be a teacher using open educational practices so that you can advise others. It's so much easier to advise people when you don't know, when you've never practiced anything. So I strongly recommend that you in some way practice teaching openly using a variety of open educational resources and tools and all of that. So yeah, experiment and be a teacher. That helps your instructional design work.
Tannis, you've mentioned in the chat that it depends on the institutional context. Are there any particular salient factors that you've noticed, like differing from place to place, that have a big impact?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I've had the benefit of working at a lot of institutions in Metro Vancouver, so I do like to contrast and compare a little bit here. But I alluded to it in my time on the slides, that like right now, at the institution I'm at right now, everything is very curriculum, policy, and procedure driven. So that's the culture. So that then becomes, regardless of how you feel about that, that can be a positive mechanism for change. And so that's where I'm looking at the moment. And it's as simple as, you know, a template for, you know, a concept paper for a program. Does it ask the question? And of course, we've added this question, is there existing open curriculum that exists elsewhere? And that question forces people to go to the OER librarian and say, can you do a search for me and tell me if this curriculum already exists openly elsewhere before we go down this path of a 1 year create a new program. So that's my current context. In my previous context, instructional designers had a lot of agency because they worked on every single program that came through. And so by saying we were an open first teaching learning center, a lot of amazing things happened where it was appropriate, because sometimes it was not appropriately open. But so those are two really different institutional contexts. I'm more in a context now where there's open education practices are really about persuading and creating faculty champions. And that can take time. And also, what's in it for them? Like, what's in it for senior leadership? What's in it for the learning designer? What's in it for the faculty person? And legitimately, you know, one of the messages that I have even just about open textbooks, which in our province, you know, we have a very good collection now as a result of BC campus investment, but just getting people to understand that Pressbooks is an enabling infrastructure that allows you to cut and paste a page from that textbook and create a module in your course. Like, there's so many, like, for me, the lowest common denominator approach of, like, the easiest thing for anybody to do is to go control copy, control paste. And OER lets you do that. And that's a message that I think is very, from a learning design perspective, is a really important one in my particular context.
And I'm just noting that Mace has dropped out, but hopefully she'll be able to come back in. I'd also like to go back a little bit to a question that Mark asked a little while ago, and Verena has responded. It's, what strategies or advice can you offer related to the practicalities of interactions with academics and others around focus on learning as a process over learning as a product? I wonder if, Verena, do you have anything you want to add to the response, and then we can ask the rest of the panel?
I think when I have those conversations, you first have those conversations with faculty, and we tend to just jump to certain focus areas. I guess we'll just say whatever it is. Another thing I would expand on that is asking them what they're passionate about. How did they learn? What did they love about learning? And have those kinds of conversations, because they generally connect to process and their experience and what happened. And then you can guide it with intention back to what you're doing. You can think about backwards design. You can be more intentional and have a strategy. But really, I think if you talk about assessment and what the outcomes are for the students and how you want to get there, it seems an easier way to get to the path of process over product focus. And then the conversations about scaffolding and everything else and layered assignments, and that all works out. But yeah, just ask them how you want to get there and how you want the students to demonstrate their learning in different ways. Again, different ways to get to process. I don't know, what about, I think Tannis and Danielle will be able to expand on that in many ways.
Well, one thing that we do in the course on sustainability is that we have students reflect frequently on their work on different parts of an assignment. We also allow them to submit work and then resubmit it after we've given them feedback. And the process is so important, because that's where people are developing their thinking skills. That's where they're developing their work skills. And so that's quite important. And yeah, they can finish up with something that's an A+, but it's the process that leads them to get a good result or not. Now, one thing I would like to promote is the research of Sam Naidu. He has also worked with Shironika Karuna Nayaka. If you want good ideas on process about open education, I recommend their work, and in particular because Sam Naidu, I find him a very kind person. So these are, he's got excellent instructional design that he proposes, often in an open education context.
Mace, we're just talking about Mark's question from earlier. Mark, I can see you have your video on. Is there anything that you want to add to this conversation?
These are good answers. Thanks for your responses. I guess my focus is on how to have the conversation with the academic. because sometimes the decision point is with the academic, and it's sort of hard, in my experience, sometimes it's hard to kind of convince an academic because they're so focused on. I was just this morning looking at a piece of work, and it was about not only the outcome within the piece of learning, but how it should be implemented in a workplace. And it was like they'd completely skipped over the process of learning, like as if it wasn't particularly relevant, and it was focused on the behavioral outcome within a workplace. And I thought, wow, okay, so sometimes it's sort of an uphill. It's almost like the pedagogy is sort of skipped over. So that's why I'm kind of, just wondering what sort of strategies about having that conversation with a decision maker.
Tannis,
But yeah,
do you wanna expand? You've put backwards design in the chat. Do you want to expand on that?
It just had me think about because I work at a community college where we're very much focused on what you just described. Like, we want to know at the outset, what does the employer want this person to do? So it's not a university academic kind of context. So again, context. But in that case, that's where backward design for us becomes really important. It starts with the end, and then it goes through, okay, well, to get to that end, what does that learning journey look like? And then that's where the negotiation space actually is, for us anyways. And I don't want to sort of say that we do a lot of open education practices here. We don't at the moment, but that's certainly, I think, a learning design model, and similar to like simulation-based, scenario-based design models, where you're starting deliberately from the end.
I have many questions leading on from there, but I just want to open up to the rest of our audience and check, does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask? While people are thinking, I'm really interested in the conversations that we've had around the identity and the position of the learning designer, and also focusing on the student. So we've gone kind of back and forth in the conversations here between, this, how did you put it, Tannis? You mentioned having an open first mindset. So the learning designer, or the people working in education having this open first mindset, and then Verena talking about the learning designer being in the middle of spaces, or translators. And then moving over, Danielle, you were focusing more, I felt, on the learner and building their trust. To me, often learning designers, yes, don't get to have that close relationship with the learner. And Danielle, you suggested that teaching experience is really useful. Are there any other ways that learning designers can kind of foster their relationship with learners or develop this aspect, particularly if they don't have access to teaching practice?
I'm lucky enough and old enough to have 2 children in higher education right now. And one of the biggest gifts as a teacher, I was a K-12 teacher for years and then got into higher education, is that you never know how whatever you teach, the seeds will be planted and how it will turn out. And I think the same is to be said for instructional learning designers. So my daughter went to class and she came home and she had the syllabus. This is when you find out who you really are. And she came and she's like, you would really like this class because you'd love the assignments, Mom. The way that they put together the assignments, and they used OER, and they thought about, it was experiential, and she's using these words, and it connects to what I want to do. I think when you can't directly connect, which I think is your point, Jenny, like if I'm not connecting to the learners, looking at survey results that talk about student engagement, how the students are engaged, what is exciting for them. So using that data and evidence in other ways, that is a result of what you did. Like it was a part, you were part of that journey as well. We often think that when we're part of a team, you have to be directly connected with everyone, but you don't have to be. There's other ways that you can see, and that's open. Like that is part of the open. The ripple effect is really, really important, and it's not all about getting the awards and whistles and extrinsic. It is not that kind of feedback. It's knowing that what you're giving is a sustainable gift to help a learner and the world, and you have to believe in that as an open learning advocate and as an open learning designer, I think. And so it's not necessarily about those relationships in which we see one-on-one. It's sometimes about how you're impacting and influencing the world in more of a ripple, holistic way. I don't know.
Anything to add from the rest of the panel?
I was just reminded of one of the people I interviewed in my research who said, because we're very passionate about, usually learning designers who are trying to get faculty to engage with OER and OEP, we're usually very passionate people and committed to the cause. But one of them actually pointed out that like, it doesn't always have to be that. Like sometimes it can just be extremely pragmatic. And I've sort of taken that away too as a reflection point in terms of advocating from the angle of pragmatism, where it's needed, and now that I'm in senior leadership, like I want to know like what's the return on investment on this? Like how much time does this take for benefit? What's the impact to the institution? Like I'm asking different questions at that level that are just very pragmatic, while obviously still being very passionate about the other parts of open that are so important.
We've got about 1 minute if anyone wants to add anything, Mace.
Just one last note on being a strong advocate for open education in our roles means that we can influence, as Danielle pointed out, to that ripple effect. And what I noticed this week also, that sense of advocacy and the tone of academics who are talking about open education. So we can be contagious, which is good in a positive way, and spread that passion from our position, because we are in that third space, right? Like third space practitioner, we see academics, we see open management, and we've been students, and we look at how students interact in the learning environment. So we're very fortunate to be in that position. And with that advocacy to open education practices, I've seen how academics actually started to be our also advocates. So it's a ripple effect. It is something beautiful to celebrate. It's not for everything, again, but it is one way to enhance that learner experience and that trust between us and academics, but also academics and their students.
And on that note, I am going to say thank you so much to our guests for today, Tannis Morgan, Verena Roberts, Danielle Dubien, and Mais Fatayer. Also to our host, Sebastian Crook, and to our UTS Open Education Week Programme Committee, Mace, David, Helen, Scott, and me. We would love your feedback if you have anything you'd like to let us know. The link is in the chat and you can use this QR code, and have a lovely rest of your day wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. That was a wonderful session.
Yeah.